Alright, welcome back, my minions. This is episode 4 of how to program a Bukkit plugin. So today we're going to be talking about the meat of your plugin. We're going to start with the same place we left off. All we got is our blank plugin. We got on enable, on disable. We've got the plugin descriptor, and we're going to add stuff today. But first, I need to talk about what a plugin really does. So in Bukkit, there's this concept of events. Everything that can happen in the game is an event, and they've done a pretty good job of capturing every single event. If you drink a potion, that's an event. If you get shot by a skeleton, that's an event. If you catch fire, that's an event. If a zombie catches fire, that's an event. If a mob dies and drops a drop, that's an event. So anything that happens in the game is an event, and the concept of plugins is to modify what those events do in a certain way. And that's what we're going to get to today. So the first concept is that everything is an event. Now, I'm kind of working backwards, and when we actually start writing the code, you'll understand. But to handle the events, you have to program what's called an event handler. And we're going to build a couple of those today just to show you what they are. But there are tons of events, and there are tons of ways to modify those events so that your plugin does a certain thing. Now, the event handlers are put into special types of classes called listeners. And the way that I like to program my listeners is I build what resembles a subsystem type of thing. So now let's hop into the code. We're going to open the plugin. And inside the plugin, I think what today we're going to work on, I'm going to do 2 events. One is I'm going to make giants drop something when they die. And 2, I'm going to make it so that zombies do not catch fire. Now, I've already done the zombies don't catch fire in another plugin, but if you do it in 2 different places, I'll show you how to deal with that today. So, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start in the on enable. I'm going to add giant system dot init, and we're going to pass in this. Now what this does is I'm going to create a singleton, kind of a pseudo singleton, for the giant system. And this is where all the code that has to do with giants is going to live. The init is going to be an initializer, and this is the plugin. Now the plugin, this plugin class, you want to pass this around the system all over the place. So pretty much everything is going to accept a Java plugin. So let's build this giant subsystem. So the first thing I do is I click on my package and I choose new package, and I'm going to call it giant. And inside that giant package, I'm going to create a class. And we'll call it giant system. Okay. Now this class does not extend any other classes. It is just it's like a branch. So if the plugin class is the entry point for the entire system, then this giant subsystem is like a branch for everything that has to do with giants. So we're going to leave that there. Now, I don't want to have this start multiple times, which is why I did init. So I want to add a private constructor, and it's going to have nothing in it because we don't want it to do anything. But what we do need to add is that init. So we need to do public static void init, and we're going to pass in a Java plugin. Now, IDEA tries to help you out. It says, hey, I know what this is. So you press Alt-Enter. Whoops, not space enter. Alt-Enter, and that'll automatically import that class for you. And now that we've created the giant system and we have an init, we can go back to plugin, and it will now say, hey, I know what this is. And so you press Alt-Enter again, and it imports that class for you. So now that we've got the giant system, we need to add a giant listener. So the way that I do that is I do giant listener, a new giant listener, and I pass in that plugin. Now, like I said before, we are going to be volleying this plugin object all over the place because we need the plugin to be able to tie back into Bukkit. So since that doesn't exist, we can go over here next to this thing and click the little light bulb and say create class. And what that's going to do is it's going to ask you where you want it. I want it in giant, and it'll put it in there. Booyah. And it'll create this. We can hit enter that, enter plugin, and we're done. So I'm going to go get rid of the comment because we don't need that. All right, now that we have the listener class, we have to actually enable it as a listener. This name means nothing. So the first thing it needs to do is it needs to implement listener, implements listener, and when you hit Alt-Enter, it's going to bring up a bunch of different objects. We want to choose the org.bukkit.event.listener, and then we have to register it with the server. Now, that's why we passed in this plugin object. So we want to go plugin dot get server dot get plugin manager dot register events, and then it's asking for the listener, so it's this and plugin. It's kind of redundant, I think, because you're already calling the plugin here, and then you're passing it back in over here. But whatever, right? So that enables. I need to add some comments. So that enables this thing as an event listener, and now this will listen for events. So what happens is behind the scene, but what Bukkit does is every time an event is called, it passes that event off to every plugin that's enabled. And every plugin looks at the event, and if it wants to modify it, it does. And if it doesn't want to modify it, it doesn't care. It just lets it go. So how do we capture an event and how do we manipulate it? That's where this comes in. So the first one that we're going to do a giant drop something. All right. So first we have to use an annotation at event handler, and we want to not use the Java Bean one because it's not a Java Bean event handler. Hit Alt-Enter and make sure that you pull in the org.bukkit event handler. Now this annotation tells the system that the next method, the public, it's always public and it's always void. The next method is going to handle an event. So the way you want to give it a name that kind of describes what it's going to do. So this is going to be giant on giant death. And the event that we're going to capture is entity death event. So now when an entity dies, every entity, this plugin will get, or this method will get called and say, do you want to do something with it? And we can, but we only want to do giants. Now, every event, almost every event, has an entity object inside of it. So we want to check and make sure that that entity is the giant. So the way that we do that with an if event dot get entity type, type equals entity types dot giant. Entity type dot giant. Now, one thing to understand is, and I'll talk about this in a later episode, talk about enums and everything, but there are many enums. And if you don't know what an enum is, like I said, I'll talk about it later. But I'll give an overview. An enum is a special type of class that, if let's say you have 100 different objects and they're all going to do the same thing, but the properties are going to be a little bit different. They build them in an enum. And what those enums do is, instead of having to write 100 different copies of the same class, it's all captured in one class. And this entity types is an enum that has every entity type in the entire game listed. If we control click that object, it'll bring it open. And these are the entity types that it knows about. So we got dropped item, experience orb, leash, hitch, painting, arrow, all this other stuff. So this is the entity type that we want to deal with. So the entity type that we care about is giant. So if this event, if the entity that died in this event is a giant, we're going to do something. So this event, and if you actually control click on the event, you can actually see what type of accessors and modifiers and stuff it has. So it has a handler list. These things we don't really care about. Drops is what we're going to modify. So there's a list in here of drops, and these are the items that are dropped when a mob dies. Typically, these are populated, like with zombies, there's a chance, a small chance that they're going to drop an iron ingot. And that is automatically populated in this drops list before it's handed off to the event listener. But the giant doesn't do anything. So what we want to do is we want to create a list or an item that we want to drop. So the first thing we do is item stack. Item stack is going to be your friend. If you ever want to create an inventory item, you want an item stack. And make sure that you choose the org.bukkit.inventory.item stack. You do not want the net.minecraft because the net.minecraft will make your plugin hard to upkeep. And you don't really need that one unless you're doing some wacky stuff with inventory. We're not going to be doing that wacky stuff. So item stack, we're going to call it an apple. We're going to make them drop an apple. In a later episode, we're going to add custom drops, custom items that are going to be dropped by this plugin. But right now, it's just an apple. If you press Control-Shift-Space, whoops, we want item, new, because we're newing it, and Control-Shift-Space will pop that in there. Now there's another enum called material, so we're going to use that, material.apple. You can actually see in this list all of the different things that this material enumeration thing has. These are like every inventory thing that you can hold is a material. But we want to drop an apple. So we make sure we drop apple, and we only want him to drop one. So there. This item now is an apple for him to drop, and now we have to add that to the event drops. So we do event.getDrops.add apple. And now, when a giant dies, every single time a giant dies, he will get an apple. And we're going to go ahead and leave that there. If you want to modify this, make it random, you can do like a int chance equals random dot next. Oops. Yeah, random dot. Oh, I need to renew it. Okay, so random equals new random, and then we want chance equal to random dot next int, and then that'll give you actually let's do this. This is better. Dot next int, and we want it out of 100, and then if chance is less than 5, so about a 5% chance that he's going to drop an apple. That's how you make it randomized, so that only 5% of the time he drops an apple. If you want it to drop 50, then you need to just add 50 or 50. If you want to drop half the time, 50%, whatever. So 5% of the time he's going to drop an apple. Whoops. So that's our first event handler. And now every time an animal or anytime any mob dies, entity dies, this will get checked. It'll check that it's a giant. If it is a giant, it's going to create this apple object, and then it's going to check the randomness of it. You can even make it a little bit better by moving this down into the chance. Oops, not that one. The apple. Move the apple down into the thing. So it's going to check and see if he can drop. If he can, it's going to create the apple. It's going to add it to the drops, and then it's going to kick out. He's going to drop an apple. Okay, so that's the first one. Next, I said we were going to do the zombie one. So let me go ahead and jump away real quick, and I'm going to create the zombie system the same way that the giant system is, and I will show you how to Make it so that zombies do not burn during the day. All right, so we got a zombie system built with a zombie listener, and we're going to stop zombies from burning. So the first thing we need to do is add the event handlers, the annotation at event handler. We want the org.bucket event one. And inside this, the annotation takes two parameters. The first one is the priority. The priority tells you what The priority tells you what order that the events will be handled in. So what happens is Bukkit combs through the available event handlers and executes them in a certain order. So there are 6 different priorities. So what it does is it starts at lowest, and it handles everybody that's lowest, and then it looks at lows, and then it looks at normal, and then it looks at high, and then it looks at highest. There's one more that's even higher than highest. It's called monitor, and you never want to use that except for to watch events. You never want to modify the event in a monitor. The monitor is only for watching the final outcome of the event. So we want this one to be high because we're going to override it with highest later. But there's another thing. If the event is already canceled, we don't want to touch it. Typically, we want to play nice, and we don't want to touch an event that's already been handled. So we can also do option in here called ignore canceled equals true. And what that'll do is if the event's already been canceled, it's not going to exist. We'll ignore it. However, I'll talk about that in a minute. So every event handler is public void. So public void, and then stop zombie fire. And this is entity combust event. Now we only want to do it for zombies, so we do the if event.get entity type equals entity type dot zombie. Then we go event dot set canceled equals true. So if it's not already canceled, we're going to cancel it because we don't want the zombies to burn. So that is how you do it. Now the problem is this will stop the zombie from burning for any reason. If the sun's out, he won't burn. If he jumps in a pool of lava, he's not going to burn. If you click him with if you hit him with an arrow, any entity, like you shoot him with a flaming arrow, you use your flint and steel on him, he won't burn. He is now immune to fire. So we have to override this in the case that he's lit on fire by a block or he's lit on fire by an entity. And we'll add that in right now. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add the event handler. And now for this one, we want the priority to be higher. So we want priority, event priority highest. And we do not want to ignore cancel because we want to uncancel the event. So public void burn zombies with block. And the event for this one is entity combust by block event. And we have to do our check again. So we'll just copy this and paste it down here. But this is going to be something different. So if it's a zombie, we want to do something, and we want to make sure that it's canceled. So and event dot is canceled. If it is canceled, we want to uncancel it. And that's it. Now, the zombie will not burn in the sunlight, but with block means if he runs into fire that's burning on top of a netherrack, or he falls into a pool of lava, those are considered blocks, and he'll burn. Now this event is not really community friendly, because some other plugin somewhere may want to prevent zombies from burning from blocks as well. And this event will override that other plugin's method. So it's not necessarily a good idea to uncancel canceled events, but in this case we want to, because we know that we're canceling it, and we know that that we want to uncancel it. Now, I set this from high and highest, but in order to play friendly with everybody else, you should probably set this to lowest and this to low. That way, if somebody else wants to cancel it later, they can. So that's how you make your plugin play nicely. What we've done here, marking them high and highest, is we've just made it so that our zombie burn system takes precedence over any other. But he still is immune to fire from, say, flaming bows. So we have to do the exact same thing. We can do most of this. We can just copy it. We want to burn zombie with entity. And the event for that is entity combust by entity event. And what that'll do, is that now allows zombies to burn based on entities. So he can get hit with a fire charge, or he can get hit with a arrow shot from a bow with flame, whatever, and now he'll burn with that as well. And those both can be highest because they're both uncanceling, and if one uncancels, the other's not going to uncancel anyways. So we're good. I know this was really quick. This video is kind of long. It's pushing 20 minutes. Oh no, it's pushing 30 minutes. So I apologize for the length, but this is just the raw, dirty beginning of the plugin. This is just talking about how we handle events. Now, I want to show you this. In IDEA, all the libraries that you attach show up under external libraries, and you can expand that. And if you expand the snapshot that we added, you'll go here. This Bukkit whatever.jar is the API that the Bukkit system uses. And if you expand that under org.bukkit.event, every single one of these methods under each of these packages is an event that you can modify. So if a player does something, say a player chats in the chat screen, you can modify that. You can modify what happens when a player joins. You can cancel when a player is booted. Let's see. If we go into entity, you can see some of the entity ones. So if the entity creates a portal, you can cancel that or modify it. You can modify when a pig gets zapped by lightning. I mean, it's just endless. So what I suggest that you do between now and the next episode, when we talk more, we'll talk about advanced event handling next episode, because we only talked about the very minor stuff this one. But go ahead and go through this event package and look at all the different events and try to get in your mind, try to plan out in your mind the events that you want to modify with your plugin. You don't have to build Fight the Infection. That's just one we're doing here, but that's the idea. So this is Master Crusader signing off. Thanks for hanging out. I know, like I said, this has been quick. Go back, watch it again, pause the video in certain places if you need to catch up. I am recording this in 720p, so if you turn on the high def, you'll be able to see actual screen size of this, with the actual size of the screen that I used to record. So if you have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments below, and I'll try to answer them next time. And yeah, we'll see you later. This is Master Crusader signing off. Cheers.